Good afternoon. This is Deirdre and Susanna from Supportive Families in Ireland. We're delighted to be here with you this afternoon to talk about building resilient support systems for families affected by eating disorders. So welcome to everyone who's joined live or is watching us later. We're delighted to be talking about or speaking about a topic that we are both so passionate about. So in terms of who we are, Susanna and I came together as supported families about 2.5 years ago. We passionately believe in the untapped superpowers of families, and we take a loose definition of the word family, as we will explain shortly. And we run online skills training and support groups for parents, partners, and family members, as well as peer groups and training for professionals. And as we work fully online, we work with families and professionals across Ireland, the UK, and even the US. I have lived experience as a parent of eating disorders. I have retrained as a coach and in eating disorders, and I now work with parents one-to-one as well as in groups with Susanna.
And welcome, my name is Susanna Gajovic, and I'm a clinical psychologist, family therapist, and I'm originally from Poland, but living over 20 years now in Ireland. And I have experience in all levels of care. I'm currently lead clinician in a private residential treatment center for eating disorders, and I also cooperate with Deirdre because we both feel that there's not enough happening for families and they don't get enough support.
So we would like to just find out maybe who's in the room with us today. So Charlie's just going to pop up a poll just to understand what hats everybody is wearing today. So if you wouldn't mind just selecting the one that's most relevant to you. And we'll just have a quick look. Okay, I'm just going to stop it now. Okay, thank you to everybody who voted. So as you can see there, it's largely professionals. We have a couple of peer support workers. We'll be talking about their role towards the end of our slot, and some carers, family members. So you're all really welcome. Thank you for completing the poll. So in terms of what we hope you will get from today, this is what we're hoping to cover. We're going to review the supports that are currently available to families. We're going to look at what the research says about the impact on families. We'll explore the barriers and challenges that face both families and clinicians and professionals. And we'll look at how professionals can include families more and support them more effectively on the most important aspects of recovery. And we will share best practice from both the available research and our own experiences. And we will also touch on the positive impact of adjunct supports provided by experts by experience, so eating disorder recovery coaches and peer support workers. There is a Q&A function, and we will make sure that we leave plenty of time at the end to answer your questions. So please pop any questions you might have as we go along into the Q&A box. Thank you.
So we've decided to focus on parents and family members because there's not enough research that is really trying to check what's happening for them, but also just hearing from the families we worked with, and Deirdre obviously for her personal experience. So sadly, there is not a lot of research focusing on families and especially on the devastating toll that eating disorders have on the whole system of family system and also friends and partners of someone with an eating disorder. But we know a lot, and we know a little bit. So there are a few reasons why we really want to focus particularly on that, and we believe that the more, especially professionals, know about that, and the better professionals are at supporting families, providing them with information that we can have better outcomes. So the first reason is that we all know that eating disorder recovery is quite a lengthy treatment. It doesn't happen very quickly that people recover. So it can be quite exhausting, and it can have a taxing result on the families. So understanding that it is long actually is very helpful. And also when we provide families with skills and we help them to build some resilience, that they will have the energy to go for a long time is very, very helpful. Another really, really important reason is that suicidality and self-harm behaviors are quite prevalent with this population. And we know that eating disorders are the most deadly of the mental health disorders, and partially not because of the consequences of eating disorders. A lot of people actually die from suicide. So the better we again educate the family members, we give them ideas of what should be on the radar, how they can not only notice warning signs, but what to do about this. Again, we can really better care for our population. We can really ensure that they are safer in our care. Because we're not with them at home, we can only provide them with a little bit of support, but they're going to go back to their communities. So the better the communities are able to support them, it makes our job safer as well. And the next reason is that, sadly, from research, again, we know that there's very high relapse rates, especially after higher levels of care. So still that transition from higher level of care to community is the most vulnerable time for people in recovery. So again, the more we, again, provide the family members or whoever is there to support them with skills and education, we can maybe change that, and we can maybe ensure that this transition is less drastic and doesn't result in relapses. And lastly, eating disorder is a disorder of denial. So quite often our work, and not only at the beginning, throughout our work with people with eating disorders, is about actually building the understanding that they need support, or building the understanding that they are unwell. So quite often, actually, it's such an untapped resource when we maybe ignore the families, or when we don't include them enough, because they would be the first one noticing something dangerous or noticing something worrying. And also they would be the ones supporting the behavioral change. And quite often, let's be honest, but our clients actually, especially maybe the adolescents, wouldn't even be interested in the behavioral change. So the behavioral change can only happen if the supporters are equipped and really able to kind of make that happen. So it's really so crucial. And equally to maybe the problems with us not equipping, or maybe the families not being equipped enough with all those tools, we often hear from professionals as well that they, and those are some direct quotes that I'm going to read to you in a minute, that they also struggle to work with families. They really don't have the clarity how to do it. That's why we decided to speak about this today. So what we hear often from professionals is like, I would love to work more with families, but I'm just terrified, or I'm not clear what involvement is appropriate for my role, or it's so hard to engage them. Or then some people say it's so hard to get rid of them. They're actually overly engaged. Yeah, so there's so many barriers, so many problems that we can face. So hopefully this webinar today is going to give you some ideas and some tools, and also guide you to some research or resources that are already available, so that you can bring this to your practice and hopefully will serve our clients better. So we know from research about the mental health issues that any engagement of carers actually improves patient outcomes. So we know that there are fewer relapses, that there's longer duration between relapses, that there's reduced hospital admissions, shorter inpatient stays, and then also it improves the compliance to medication and treatment plans. So this is really significant, really important, why we should maybe look more into the supporting the family members. There's a bit less specific, like research that's specific to eating disorders, but it has actually similar results. Again, you will get the list of all the resources at the end. So also what we know is that involvement of the close ones in all stages of care has a positive impact. So sometimes we are more interested maybe at the beginning, in the refeeding phase, or with adults. Suddenly we sometimes completely overlook the importance of the family members. But it is really important that we remember that they have positive role in all stages of treatment. And then also, this prototypical kind of family interactions or family dynamics have never been found. So previously, we've been thinking that maybe there's something in the family, that families are to blame, or there's something happening there. We have no research that supports that. So that's definitely not true. And that's something we're going to speak about in a minute as well. It's really important that we change the perceptions of the family as well.
So when we talk about family, it's probably worth clarifying what we mean when we say family. So we all understand the definition of family in its strictest sense, in terms of the nuclear family, a family that's made up of close blood relatives. However, there are many different types of families. So we have blended families, single parent families, step families, extended families. And for some people, their family is not their family of origin, but a chosen family of close friends. And this can be for lots of different reasons. And in our experience working together, we can see that the vast majority of families want nothing more than their loved one to recover, and they are willing to support that in any way that they can. But sometimes they don't know how to do that because they're not supported themselves, and they can inadvertently be causing their loved ones difficulties. But by being educated, equipped, and empowered, they can support their loved ones in some way. But for some individuals, family of origin can be difficult. Their families of origin are difficult, and they're unable or unwilling to provide support. And we all know that most individuals do require support when they're recovering from an eating disorder, whether that be around meal times, supporting when the urge to binge or purge is very high, or the urge to restrict. So friends can step in and provide this support instead, and very effectively too. We have heard of friends, people moving in with their friends to get that ongoing support. So as professionals, I guess what we're saying is we should be flexible. If somebody doesn't have direct familial support, then maybe a friend can come along and support them on the journey as well.
So there's a question in the Q&A if this webinar will be focusing more on under 18s. Actually, no, we're trying to focus a little bit more. We would speak a little bit about the family-based treatment and what happens with under 18s, but no, we want to actually focus more on the adults, because there's even more barriers and there's more struggles for family members of adults to access even information, sometimes, not to mention access support or maybe be included in the family treatment team. So yeah, there is much more extensive research on the under 18s, especially if they are part of the family-based treatment, and family-based treatment has amazing results. Again, it's really properly including family members and really tapping into that resource. So we're going to be speaking slightly less. You'll mention that. So thank you for that question. Okay, so sadly we have a very bad history with families. We really were not viewing them properly, and that's why there's still a little bit of work that we need to do. I think a lot of families are quite reluctant to access services because they're scared they might be. It's good to acknowledge that we've done some harm as a field, as a, psychologists, psychotherapists. There was some harmful things happening in the past. So sadly, in the past, families were viewed as a source of mental health issues and something that's interfering with the process of therapy, and that we should just put them aside and focus on the individual. So we still have this individual kind of treatment therapy model. Of course, it's changing, thank God, but it's still there. And also, I think the other problem was that the mental health was viewed more from like illness. We were just looking and just more interested in what's wrong, what's not working, rather than in the resources or looking at it from the wellness perspective. And also in this whole, and this is of course true, eating disorders are complex issues, but in this kind of focusing so much on how complex they are, we were positioning ourselves as professionals as more important, marginalizing sadly not only the family member, but sometimes even the individual, and kind of completely forgetting that there's so much that the family can provide, or even in the inner wisdom of the person that we treat. So again, it's changing, but yeah, there's still some maybe residues that we have to be aware of. So the current knowledge is very different. So we know there are some very significant biological factors that contribute to the development of an eating disorder. So we do inherit predisposition or tendency towards developing an eating disorder. And the recent research actually suggests it's very, very significant. So families could be already dealing with some genetic predisposition, so we definitely shouldn't blame them. It's already quite difficult. So what we know from research is that this inherited biological and genetic factors contribute approximately 56% of the risk for developing an eating disorder. So in other words, individuals who have a mother or sister with anorexia are approximately 12 times more likely to develop anorexia and 4 times more likely to develop bulimia compared to the families where there was no eating disorder. So this is one significant thing that we know, that it's not the interactions in the family or particular patterns that are in the family, it's more the genetics. The other aspect of something that's new and that we know is this research that we mentioned earlier, that when families and carers are involved, the outcomes are better. But what we didn't mention before is that the outcome is better for us clinicians. And this is so important, and we want to speak to that, because sometimes we feel like, oh, we have so much to do. How can we include the families? There's so many problems in the field of eating disorders. We're already dealing with so much, but this is really important to consider, because we know from research that it's good for us, again, in terms of safety, keeping people safe, but also in terms of the outcomes. Actually, outcomes are more positive, and who wouldn't want more positive outcomes, especially in our field, because it's so slow and difficult. And then, especially with the newest neuroscience, we can understand that we do all live in systems, and how our nervous systems work, and how we all need safety to feel regulated, and that we all need belonging. So I think it's shifting again from this individualistic point of view to more systemic, and we also kind of take into consideration all this indigenous wisdom that we all heal best in groups, or we heal best when we support it.
Thanks, Susanna. So there's just a couple of comments in the Q&A that I can just take, and you might help too. So Marianne just suggested the use of the word support network, rather, so to distinguish between families and kind of the broader support network, which is very helpful. We often call them supporters, because then again, it's a lot broader. And then to the question about whether it's genetics or learned behavior, the actual genetic link is very high, as Susanna clarified, rather than learned behaviors. But clearly, as parents particularly, we do role model. We have an important role to play as role models with our children. So in terms of what's available to families at present, there are supports available, as we mentioned earlier, and as you can see here from the slide. So family-based treatment for adolescents does involve a family member. There are the Eating Disorder Association, so BEAT in the UK, Bodywise is our equivalent in Ireland. They often run support groups and education sessions for families, and the new Maudsley carers here in the UK as well. Organisations such as Feast and individual therapy and counselling are all available for parents. All great organisations, all providing support. But I guess the key thing about them is really that they're standalone, so they're not integrated with the treatment team, and they're not joined up with the treatment team. And families and carers of people affected by eating disorders commonly report that they don't understand the illness, and they don't understand what to do about it. They also say that they don't receive useful information from their health services when treatment begins. So they're therefore not empowered to stop things getting worse while their loved one starts on the treatment journey, or they don't know how to support the treatment regime. And they're also not generally aware that there is support available for families. And we will touch later on some of the barriers to accessing support for families. So there was a question put into the chat earlier about, whether the webinar, as Susanna said, focuses on under or over 18s. There's very little research on the impact on families of adults, unfortunately. And equally, there isn't an awful lot of research on the families of adolescents. This slide details a study that was undertaken in Australia last year. And the study interviewed 439 parents of adolescents who had an eating disorder. And we do know from the evidence base that is there that caring for a loved one with an eating disorder leads to an increased risk of developing clinical levels of depression and anxiety. And as we can see here from the research I just mentioned, the impact on caregivers is very significant. And while this is for parents of adolescents, there's no reason to presume that it's different for parents supporting adults on the recovery journey. So as you can see from the slide, 96% of people reported worse than normal psychological health. Almost 71% felt that caregiving had an impact on their physical health, and 51% would have benefited from more support for their own distress. I suppose positively in the study, 81% of parents identified the symptoms of the illness, but disappointingly had only a 15%, 1-5, chance of a positive initial experience with the GP or a therapist. Parents also reported that they had to take 70 days leave to support their child, And on average, they were spending 21 hours a week supporting their loved one. And the research does suggest that parental self-efficacy is linked with a reduction in the child's, and by child, I mean any age child, in their eating disorder symptoms. So again, just reinforcing the point that supporting the parents is helpful for both parents and child in terms of their overall well-being. And we do believe this applies equally to parents of adult children. This is why I suppose we're so passionate about the work that we do.
Just want to mention something that appeared in the chat, and it's fantastic that when you share that you run different things, it's all so great. And we just need more of that, I guess. There are really great resources. Someone mentioned the emotionally focused family therapy. Like it's really great resource. It's just that we, I guess, want to highlight that much more can be happening, or that it would be very helpful, I guess, if it was a standard thing for any treatment rather than people have to look for it outside of their treatment teams or outside of the treatment providers, or even have the burden of trying to find resources themselves. So we just want to mention the financial burden as well, because something that's maybe less spoken about, but huge and really contributes to the burnout that families often experience. So there are a few resources that we looked into. So one is the Butterfly report, and we have a new one now, but it kind of just the numbers were quite similar. So what we found from the Butterfly report in Australia is that parents were saying that they spent about 12.4 hours per week in caring for the person with an eating disorder, which translated to extremely large estimated cost, and that is both cost of how much they have to spend on the treatment and how much it actually costs them to care for them, but also it's a cost of lost wages and lost time or lost opportunities for them. And then there's another report from New Zealand. So again, what's interesting is that people were saying that even though they had either no private insurance or that they had access to public treatment, they still were subsidizing, or they still had to access private treatment because it didn't feel like it was enough. And again, it's added to their financial burden, and it really was something that it took the family years to recover from. And then again, another one from UK. So again, really huge numbers, nearly 3,000 per year or nearly 6,000 per year in relation to the other economic costs, such as time off work and education costs. So yeah, I think it's really worth acknowledging, because sometimes in the busy world, and maybe we focus a bit more on the person who has an eating disorder, and I think it's good to acknowledge what happens to the family members as well.
And the references to all of those studies we have at the end of the slides as well. So we mentioned before about barriers, and I guess that these are some of the barriers that parents or families, sorry, when I mean families, that face families in terms of accessing support for themselves. So as you can see there in the slide, some of them are about, not getting help on time, not having the time to access support for themselves, not having the money. And Susanna has just already talked about the financial burden. Sometimes parents or loved ones don't feel that they're being taken seriously by professionals. We know that there are significantly more struggles in terms of accessing support if it's an adult who's suffering, for the male population, if for neurodivergent individuals, and for individuals with atypical anorexia. And understandably, a lot of the time, parents particularly will prioritize getting help for their loved one. So they will put all their time and energy into accessing supports, therapy, dietitians to support their loved one. And as I said, they don't often realize that there is support available for them. And it really is only when they access this support that they realize how beneficial it can be, and how also it can support the work of the professionals, as Susanna alluded to earlier. Because if somebody's getting outpatient treatment, there are 168 hours in a week, and they spend an hour a week with the therapist, half an hour a week with the dietitian. That's a lot of hours at home with their close loved ones or their supporters. And the more equipped and educated and empowered they can be, they can in turn then support the work of the professionals. And we have found that it's very helpful. And as we're speaking to mostly professionals today, it's very helpful if the professionals can help the parents or the close family members or the friends identify and overcome these barriers to accessing support for themselves, explaining to them how important it is for them to prioritize themselves too, because it benefits absolutely everybody. And just to mention, we have a free video resource on our website detailing all of these barriers and how to overcome them if it's something that might be helpful to share with parents and families that you work with.
I think it's also worth to mention that even families who access support, who go through very diligently through all the training and read about things, they also not free from the chances of experiencing a burnout. And I think sometimes, again, of course, we don't want to be negative, but I think being realistic and actually preparing people for, we're going to talk about realistic expectations in recovery, but I think if we just tell them a bit more, because the chances are that, again, because of the genetics components, that they are equally as perfectionistic and, you know, hard on themselves as our clients. So I think when we explain that no one can be absolutely free from burnout, it sometimes happens, and maybe we prepare them for that and we give them some tools that can help them a lot. And there was a question about, like, some families don't want their family members, some people don't want their family members to be included. Again, because quite often it's because they had a lot of painful experiences. So that's why this is so important that we start well, that, you know, the support and including family members, it starts from the very beginning. And we can sometimes, not always, of course, sometimes nothing will help much, but, you know, I think we can maybe change the scene a little bit, because yeah, sadly, especially for people living with chronic eating disorder, yeah, there's a lot of bridges that are burned just because of how extensive and excessive the eating disorder behaviors are. It's actually really hard to live with them under one roof. You know, just the eating disorder behaviors are so damaging to the whole system. So that's why they sometimes, the family maybe doesn't want to be included, or maybe the person doesn't want to include them. But again, we can improve so much. And hopefully in the future, maybe there'll be less cases like that, that there's absolutely no connection. People are completely isolated because of their eating disorder. So we also have challenges, of course. It's not just that families experience that. You know, I do want to acknowledge that as clinicians, we do have we are very busy and, you know, quite often quite overwhelmed with the amounts of stuff that we need to do, especially, I don't know if it's the case in UK as well, but definitely in Ireland since the pandemic, there was such a demand for psychotherapists, psychologists, and even any mental health support, that everyone is feeling a bit overworked and overwhelmed. Yet again, that's why it's so important that maybe you take the parts that will just make your life easier. And I think especially when we improve in terms of clarity, and we're going to share something with you that's so helpful, because we already have guidelines, we already have things, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to maybe bring it to our organizations, or maybe even if you work privately, just include that more into our work, and everything will improve and everything will be easier. Another challenge faced by a lot of the clinicians is that, you know, it's really difficult to communicate sometimes with other institutions or other places that treat our clients, sometimes between team members in our own team, or sometimes, you know, if we work privately, just even to establish that culture of sharing information in the team. But this is so important. Again, eating disorder is a disorder of denial, but also secrecy. The more secrets, the more people are split and they don't know about things, the more space for eating disorder. So we really, that's a huge thing we can improve on. And also another thing I want to mention is that, you know, we do have to have very good boundaries, and sometimes we have to really work on that. It really helps to understand that if we see a partner or a parent of someone with an eating disorder, there are high chances that they be super overwhelmed, really stressed, and that will be quite dysregulated. And that's why sometimes we experience them as difficult, or they can't hear when we say no, or they don't remember the boundaries, you know. So, but the responsibility is on us. We can't expect someone who's highly distressed to take that burden of having good boundaries, you know, on their side. So this is something that we could definitely improve on.
So in terms of what good support looks like, so we've already talked about barriers and challenges, and we've talked about the research. So we would love to get to a point where at the first initial stages, when somebody is worried, so a family member or close friend is worried and either brings or encourages their loved one to visit a medical practitioner or a therapist, we would love it if the healthcare professional was able to recognise the early warning signs of an eating disorder and refer the individual and their supporters down an appropriate pathway as early as possible. We would love if those supporters were directed to support for themselves. And what does that look like? It's education on eating disorders, the understanding of and training in the skills, and we'll touch on those a little bit later, the skills and tools that can support their loved one on the recovery journey, and access to support for themselves, whether that be parent coaching or individual therapy, that they have access to ongoing support, perhaps via a monthly support group, where they can also get support from others on the same journey. Because speaking personally, unless you've been there yourself, it's really hard to understand. Where the supporters of the support network are key members of the treatment team, because after all, they are the experts on their person, and the treatment team is the expert on the illness. And often in our work, Susanna and I will work together, where I'll support the parents, Susanna will support the individual, and we will work collectively and collaboratively, preserving confidentiality throughout and preserving the sanctity of the client-therapist relationship. Because sometimes the things that the individual is finding triggering, or the things that maybe they're not getting enough support on, can be ironed out pretty quickly. Any wrinkles can be ironed out. And also, we can't stress enough the appropriate support for siblings, because they are also significantly impacted. So all of this coming together would facilitate more informed treatment, which potentially has the impact to shorten the length of the illness. And the supporters are then feeling empowered and equipped and educated, and they have strategies, they're focused, rather than feeling overwhelmed, guilty, terrified, and in distress, because as we've seen already, there is a significant impact on the families.
So this is something that I would really like you to maybe read more on. It's included in the resources. So it's a document created by Beat, but built on the NICE guidelines and in accordance to other highly esteemed organizations. So it's like really the best of the best in our field, kind of looking at what is the recommended way to deal with families, and what we know from research again would be the most helpful. Again, sadly, this is not always happening. So sometimes maybe if you look at that, you could think, oh, I definitely need to improve, or maybe we need to have a team conversation about this, but it already exists. We know the guidelines. They're very good guidelines. It's just maybe in looking into how we can implement them a bit better. So what is mentioned in the document is that there should be optimal involvement and support as well of carers. And again, that's sometimes already a barrier for adult carers of adults. What's mentioned again is that there's absolute importance of the carers to be kind of considered a resource in recovery, and really tapped on. That the carers should receive comprehensive information upon diagnosis about eating disorders. Again, that doesn't always happen with adults. Actually, sometimes family members really struggle to even know what the diagnosis is or what the recommendations are. And I guess this is kind of badly understood confidentiality. And, again, sometimes we can't do anything about it. If someone is really adamant that they don't want their family members to be included, we really can't do anything, rather than maybe look for other people that can support them, that maybe we could persist that they provide another next of kin, or someone that we could include into the treatment team. Because we sometimes just stop with that. They just don't want their parents to know, and that's it. Like, I think the creative way of dealing with that would be to keep persisting that it would be helpful to have someone. And it's very rare. Like, sometimes it does happen that people are so isolated that they don't have anyone. Again, then maybe we can suggest something else, like peer support worker, or someone else that could be on there, or a coach, someone that could provide that support for them. But so often we actually overlook that. We don't kind of look for someone that could be in their life that could take that role of a supporter. And this is really interesting one, and I don't think that is happening a lot. That carers and siblings should be offered an assessment of their own needs and diagnosis, and we should monitor their well-being throughout. Again, they're so like overlooked, just we all focus on family or on the person with eating disorder, or we look at them as the only source of support for their loved one. We don't look at their mental health or the burden of actually caring for someone, or we don't have enough support maybe for them. And again, that contributes to the burnout and can end very badly for everyone. That we should include the peer-to-peer support. So again, sometimes as professionals, not always, and I think we are improving, but sometimes we are a bit like reluctant to maybe add non-professional team members, someone who just has lived experience. Again, it's really helping. Of course, it has to be appropriate and within boundaries, but it really does help a lot. And that we have to make sure that there are some opportunities for carers to learn necessary skills. And again, we are very big on that because we feel that there's more information, but much less skills. Again, for the maybe people whose loved one is under 18, there's a bit more, like new Maudsley model, and there are some programs, but when it comes to adults, there's slightly less. Again, someone mentioned the family-focused, emotionally focused family therapy, which is a great resource, but yeah, I would like to see more resources and more support for people. And then another bit that's really, really important is that we should inform and engage carers in this transitional period that I mentioned before is the most vulnerable time that people actually relapse a lot. And again, that's not often happening, especially in the terms of actually giving them tools, really helping them to be able to take over and to support the person. Quite often what happens is that the person's very supported. There's a very tight structure in higher levels of care, but then as they go home, families are really disoriented. All they get maybe is a meal plan, but not much more, much more information. And that's why maybe there's such a reported huge relapse rate within that kind of transition. And then we should obtain carers' feedback and take that into consideration in the ways that we design our services or the way that we work.
So as we're kind of coming towards the end now, we want to share 3 tangible things that you can share with the families that you work with, or if you're a family member, that you can seek from the professionals or the treatment team. So we're going to look at making sure that there's enough clarity. Susanna will bring you through this shortly. Making sure that the individual and their support systems have realistic expectations around the treatment and recovery process. Understanding that there are many speed bumps along the road to recovery and that that's okay. And finally, we'll touch on some of the skills that we believe are key to family members supporting their loved ones and themselves.
Before I move to the clarity, I just want to speak to one of the questions. So it is difficult for the family members to talk about themselves. Yeah, this is so true that they often would much rather focus on talking about their loved one or difficulties with that. I know the struggle. It is really, really difficult. I think when we try to flip it and we actually show them, which we're going to talk a little bit later about, that their nervous system is the key resource. And actually when they, like their self-care isn't just theirs. It's not like selfish thing to do. It actually contributes to the well-being of their loved one. It's maybe that they can open up a little bit more, but anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. So I think out of all the things we can help families, especially initially, is the clarity. I think the more clarity within the team, the treatment team, or within the family, we just create a situation where there's less space for an eating disorder. So I run family education sessions for over 10 years, and I used to assume that family members would know things. So I kind of skipped a little basic information, basic things, and kind of really wanted to get into the juicy things of like how to do things. But I don't do it anymore. I don't assume anything. I think it's really safe to just start from the very beginning, because sometimes, again, they maybe have been so distressed that they don't remember half of the things that were said to them. Maybe they just hear it for the first time. It's really, really good to start with basics every time and just really make sure that people have this like basic clarity of like what is an eating disorder, how it affects their loved one, how they're thinking, how their brain works, and all those things. Of course, always in the treatment of eating disorder, we try to help the person to separate from their eating disorder. Yes, suddenly eating disorder is something that feels so blended with the self. We call it the egosyntonic disorder, that the person actually sometimes struggles to recognize it as a separate thing. So of course, every time we help the person to separate, we give them some ideas of, oh, this might not be me, this is the eating disorder. That's helpful. But I think teaching family members the same is so helpful, not only that they can help in that process for their loved one, but also when they externalize eating disorder, they're much less triggered. They can actually see that it's not coming from the person, it's not on purpose. Again, sometimes families go too far and they just call everything, oh, this is just your eating disorder speaking. That's also annoying and not helpful. But I guess, again, the more time we have with them, the more we can give them, we can even speak to that, it's not throwing everything into the one kind of basket. I think it's really, really important for families to understand the process of recovery. This is something that we hear a lot from the families we work with, that it was such a relief for them to know it's long, it's complicated. They really didn't know that. And again, because they often are quite perfectionistic and hard on themselves, they would have extreme expectations, and that's why they burn out quicker or they feel like a failure quicker. And no one works well, or no one functions best when they actually feel like they're a failure. And another thing that we have to help them not to lose clarity of is to think of their loved one as an individual, remembering who they are. So again, we not only just helping them to recognize the eating disorder bit, but also to help them to really focus on the healthy self of the person. And this is such an incredibly healing for the people with eating disorders, because when they feel that their family members persistently and like quite stubbornly see more than the eating disorder in them, that's so motivating and so good for them. So realistic expectations is another thing that's so important, and we found that families were so grateful and so happy when we spoke about, again, we don't have that much time, but we'll share our most favorite resources. So this picture is something that provides so much relief for both people with eating disorders, but also their family members, because again, they would have those crazy expectations that things would be fast and easy, and if they do them perfectly, everything will go well. Sadly, the reality of recovery from an eating disorder, partially because the person's always struggling and there's two parts that kind of fight all the time, is that it's back and forth, and that's quite messy, and it's actually very complicated. And sometimes when families really know that it's not me, it's not our family, it's not my loved one that's going back and forth and that's wrong, it's actually what happens to everyone. This really sets the scene very differently. And we often talk about the family members actually needing to increase their tolerance for messiness and their tolerance for their own distress, for their own parts that are very perfectionistic. So the more we talk about this, the clearer they are that it's not going to be smooth and easy. This is another resource that we absolutely love. This comes from Sandra Kronberg. She's a wonderful dietitian, many years working with eating disorders. She actually sells her little resources. They're very handy. So if you want to look into more of those brilliant resources, please do. So this kind of speaks about the expectation of maybe stopping the behaviors forever, or how maybe sometimes we view acting on the eating disorder as like a failure. So the lines represent, the points that we get triggered and we fall into the pit of eating disorder behaviors. So as you can see, what's realistic is just to kind of expect that over time, those pits, as we equip people, as we give them more tools and they learn more about themselves and they learn how to manage their emotions, that those pits are going to become smaller, and those times between the trigger are becoming larger or longer. That's realistic expectation. Not that someone, when they get the education, they just stop the behavior and they just keep it. They don't use them forever. That provides such a relief to both the people with eating disorders and their family members, because that is more realistic. And also what we say, we're not saying, oh, it's just going to keep happening, don't worry about it. We say that each time it happens, we just learn from it. We just really pause and we try to get as much information so that next time actually the pit is smaller and the time between the trigger is longer. So it's not that we are necessarily saying, oh yeah, whatever, but we also helping people to really have realistic expectations, because many family members actually would think, would use that language like, oh, she was doing so well for 5 days and now failure, We really want to change that language. That's really not helping anyone.
And then just in terms of skills and what do we mean when we say skill building? So as we said already, we really believe that family members can benefit from some of the skills and tools that therapists use, and that's what we teach in our work. So when somebody has an eating disorder, they are emotionally dysregulated, as Susanna mentioned. Their nervous system is in fight or flight mode. And we teach parents and family members and friends that they have a real superpower because they love their person and their loved one will respond well to them because of the close relationship that they have. So by understanding this superpower that they have and learning to regulate their own emotions, they can in turn co-regulate the emotions of their loved one. So the question that was put into the chat for that parent, if he could learn to understand how he can support his son by regulating his own emotions. And we often say that for family members, when an eating disorder emerges in a family, it's like they've landed on another planet, because the tools that we've used, the communication that we've used, the skills that we've used in the past and that have worked well up until now don't work so well anymore. So often we find that we're walking on eggshells. And it doesn't mean that we're not good siblings, not good partners, not good parents. We just need to learn some new skills. So we call it parenting against the grain or counterintuitive parenting, because our natural instinct as parents is to try and fix things. So kind of to be the kangaroo, trying to make everything better, trying to make it all go away. We provide reassurance, we facilitate avoidance of anxiety-provoking situations because we think we're doing the right thing. So we need to develop a new way of communicating. We need to learn to be the coach rather than the parent. We need to learn to be compassionate, but firmly compassionate. And we need to learn to tolerate their distress rather than trying to make the distress go away. Because as we all know, treatment is uncomfortable. And that's hard. And that's why we need the skills we do need to help. And some of the tools that parents find particularly helpful, and this includes parents of adults and partners, not just parents of adolescents. So both are new Maudsley tools. So the animal metaphors to depict caring styles are always well received by parents, no matter the age of their loved one, and by partners, because we can understand how we may adopt different styles at different times. They're easy to understand and easy to recognize, and where perhaps we've used a caring style that maybe is not as helpful. And when Susanna spoke earlier about the egosyntonic nature of eating disorders, and the focus tends to be on the eating disorder part of the self, so the red balloon, very important too that we don't lose sight of the individual, as we said earlier, and that we blow up their blue balloon. We think about all the things that are important to them, what their strengths are, the good things about them, what their hopes and dreams for the future are as well.
I just looked at the chart, and there was a question about like how traumatic it can be for both the person, of course, but also for the family members when their loved one is in hospital, maybe NG fed against their will. Like it's so profoundly traumatic. So I think just one of the bits that I'm mentioning here, I think we do need to be trauma informed, and I think quite often we have to speak about this. And again, the more information families have about even like some of the symptoms they might experience after that, just we speak about post-traumatic stress, what to look out for, how important it is for them to take care of themselves. It's so important. So we really need to work a little bit to be more kind of specialized in the eating disorder, because most of us are wonderful. We are wonderful professionals, but the eating disorder field is so different, and we do need much more specialized training. And there is a limited kind of resources around that. So I guess maybe that's a little bit of, and all of you again are wonderful people who want to learn, and you obviously look for that more and more training. And then again, the therapy has to be appropriate. So it has to be trauma informed if it's appropriate, although myself and Deirdre, we have this kind of stand on that anyone with an eating disorder eventually would have a traumatized nervous system, because just living with that horrible voice and being bullied all the time and being told you're not worth anything is highly traumatizing. But then also we have to take other comorbidities into consideration, or of course, many of our clients are quite neurodiverse. So we have to take that also into consideration and have tools to help them, or maybe refer, or maybe include someone else into our team. We have to make sure that the level of care is appropriate. Like sometimes what is happening is that we are expecting people to get better, but they're just not resourced or they're not supported enough at the current level of care. And that's why, again, it leads to the burnout for the person. They feel like they're failing, or it leads to the burnout for the families, or sometimes the families maybe blame them. And, that kind of can lead to the separation or the complications in family relationships. And then, of course, we're all about educating parents and carers. So that's nothing new.
And then just, some acknowledgements from parents, I suppose, in terms of the positive impact they've gained from working with us. So they found their tribe, they felt empowered, they felt less alone, because it is a very isolating and lonely journey to be on. And we said we would touch very briefly, so I'm conscious of time. So we've spoken about the adjunct support, So we've spoken already about the positive impact that the support network or the supporters can have when they're supported themselves and they're educated. But we also just wanted to mention the other supports that can make a difference to eating disorder recovery. So as well as parents, coaches such as myself, eating disorder recovery coaches and peer support workers can also contribute too, especially where the parents and family are unable or unwilling to help. And there was some comment in the chat about that earlier. So for example, it can be very helpful to have meal support when someone is on their own, or be able to talk to someone who has traveled the road to recovery. Clearly, there are challenges in terms of making sure that these individuals are properly trained and supervised, etc., but certainly worth considering. And I noticed recently in Australia, guidelines or guidance for peer workers has recently been published to support the great work that they do.
I'm trying to answer the chat as well.
Oh, yeah.
So
I can
the
do
two golden nuggets that we really want to highlight is that the parents are experts on their loved one, and we are experts on the treatment. So we really need to cooperate. It's not good for us when we keep them in the dark a little bit, or don't know what to do with them, or don't know how to engage them. And this bit about co-regulation. So I think Deirdre spoke about this, but this is our main message sometimes to parents, and so empowering for them that they have themselves, and their connection with their loved one is much stronger than any professional, of course, taking that their relationships aren't completely negative. And when they understand that they have this power to help their loved ones to down-regulate their affect, or that they have this power to just keep them feeling safer, or keep their nervous system feeling safer, that really changes things. They sometimes, even without necessarily feeling like they're doing anything amazing, or they're saying the right thing, or they're doing the right thing, they can feel more useful. They can feel that actually just my presence and my calmness and my ability to just listen to you, or to kind of try to down regulate you, is so amazingly important. Because quite often people with eating disorders know what they should do. They just in the moment not able, because they're in the fight, flight, or freeze response, and they just lose kind of connection with their rational self. So that is so valuable, and those are the two nuggets that we would like you to take. Of course, I'm sure some of you already knew that, but this is something that we find most helpful.
And we will share the resources and references that we mentioned. And just to share some of the stuff we have coming up, we would love for you to keep in touch. If you have any questions that we haven't had the chance to answer today, or additional questions, please feel free to email us at our email address and our other contact details there. And our newsletter keeps people abreast of all that's coming up. And we're grateful for your attention. And we're very happy now to take any questions or answer any questions in the Q&A that we haven't answered as yet.
So if anyone would like to answer the question directly, that'd be great. I'm just going to go through the questions that maybe we didn't speak to. Yeah, there was one question about like what to do when the person doesn't want their family members included, or maybe when the family members don't want to be or not so active. I think this is the part that we really learned to be super flexible. And I think sometimes how we try to do that, we just accept the situation that we deal with at the beginning, but we always try to keep in mind that it is so beneficial when we try to include the family members. So I've worked with some individuals and they were so absolutely convinced that we never ever will be able to include family members. But throughout our work, and actually for me too, like always looking for little opportunities to maybe speak about their support network or how wonderful it would be to include more people. Eventually, you know, that sometimes took a very long time. They were actually open to include someone. It maybe not always was the family member, what maybe it was a friend, maybe it was someone else that they found that they could trust. But that's so important. So I do accept where I meet the people where they are, but I always keep that in mind and try to, if it's possible, to actually help people to open up to other opportunities or other supports, because no one can really realistically heal alone. And sometimes when people are very stubborn about that, it's because they're so scared that they will be let down again or they'll be hurt again. So I do want to acknowledge that, and I'm not forcing anything, but I think sometimes when they even through one relationship feel a bit safer, they could be more open to reaching out to someone else.
And there was another question asked about whether nonviolent resistance or nonviolent communication informs our approach. Yes, we do use some of those tools in terms of the work that we do. And there was another one about very hard once the child is 16. Absolutely. In terms of accessing support, and the transition between CAMHS and adult services is very challenging here in Ireland. I'm sure it's the same in the UK. It's very difficult because a child or a young person doesn't wake up and automatically become an adult the day their 18th birthday. So I think there really is a need to kind of join up those services a little bit better. Because back to what Susanna said earlier about transition times, and the BEAT guidelines actually talking about kind of the need for additional support at that time. So absolutely, we completely understand how challenging that is.
Mm-hmm. There's also comments that parents might be the cause of the issue. I find it not very helpful to think that way, and that's a choice. I was thinking that way, and I often think that way, or try not to think that way. I think when we think like that, it's obvious that then we don't want to have anything to do with them, and you know we would actually want to even protect our client from their parent. Again, sometimes we do need to do that, and that's actually the best thing to do. But I think sometimes even in the way we, again, I don't mean that we can include everyone. Sometimes it would be actually quite damaging if we try to include this person. I think sometimes maybe the question that helps me to distinguish between, is it still worth to keep trying to include that person, or would that be damaging, is when the clients tell me that you know, whatever they say in the session is used against them, that will be kind of speaking against actually including that person. But I think I'm trying to change that, and I try to be a bit more compassionate in the sense that even the people who do cause harm often don't cause that harm on purpose, or you know, there might be some multi-generational trauma that they just perpetuate, or it could be even partially, like I think a lot of the problems, I don't know if that's what you meant, is the shared culture we live in. We live in a very crazy culture that's very fat phobic and that's very unhelpful. You know, we sometimes parents, when they do those things, when they like on a diet and push those diets on their kids, they actually try to be helpful. They really believe this is good for the child. So I kind of try to have a little bit more compassion and on this kind of broader understanding, because and sometimes I found this was helpful. Sometimes this actually was the buy-in for the unhelpful or the difficult person in their life, and eventually we maybe were able to include them and educate them or help them a little bit. Sometimes not, sometimes it's actually impossible, again, especially when the person says that it's like whatever happens is used against them. That's absolutely not helpful and counter therapeutic. But I just try to kind of keep a bit more open mind and look beyond.
Sorry, Susanna, it was where the child had been abused by the parents.
Oh no, of course, that's yeah.
In terms of
things.
the format regularity, so typically when we would work together, Susanna will meet her client kind of once a week. I will meet the parents every 2 weeks. We obtain full consent in terms of any kind of sharing of communication. And it does generally tend to be stuff around the edges. So kind of triggering language, perhaps, rather than anything more fundamental. And it does work well. And then often the parents will work with us in a group context as well. Sexual abuse, sorry.
Oh,
And we are aware of the free services, and they can be really helpful. We're familiar with those. We don't have an equivalent, unfortunately, in Ireland. Okay, I think we have answered.
I'm sorry if we didn't answer some of them. It's not that we are mean. It was just very busy trying to keep up with the slides and also keep an eye on the chat. So just maybe email us if we didn't answer. Okay, so thank you very much. We really
Thank you.
enjoyed that.